Welcome everyone to another deep dive into the hidden history of television. Today we're peeling back the curtain on a side of Johnny Carson rarely discussed. His secret battles with guests he considered, well, evil. Now hold on a second. Before you conjure images of caped villains plotting world domination from the Tonight Show green room, let's clarify what we mean by evil. We're not talking about literal mustache-twirling malevolence. We're talking about something far more nuanced, far more insidious, something that gnawed at the very core of Johnny Carson's being. Think about it. Johnny was the king of late night. He ruled that stage with a unique blend of wit, charm, and effortless cool. He was a master of improv, a quick thinker, and above all, a consummate professional. He could handle practically any personality that walked onto his set. From the biggest movie stars to the most eccentric authors, from the up-and-coming comedians to the seasoned politicians, Johnny could navigate any conversation, make anyone feel comfortable, or at least appear to, and keep the show running smoothly, night after night, year after year. It was a remarkable feat of skill and adaptability. But beneath that polished surface, behind that iconic desk, Johnny Carson possessed a deeply ingrained set of values. He believed in respect, professionalism, and a certain code of conduct, both on and off camera. He expected his guests to uphold those values as well. And when they didn't, well, that's where things got interesting. The golden age of television, for all its glitz and glamour, was also a breeding ground for colossal egos, unchecked privilege, and frankly some pretty appalling behavior. Imagine being Johnny Carson, tasked with entertaining millions every night, while simultaneously wrangling a menagerie of personalities, some of whom were actively trying to sabotage the show, disrespect the staff, or simply be difficult. We're talking about guests who were rude to the crew, guests who made inappropriate advances, guests who were blatantly racist or sexist, guests who were so self-absorbed that they sucked the very life out of the studio. Guests who, in Johnny's eyes, violated the unspoken contract of decency and respect that he held so dear. Now, Johnny wasn't one for public confrontation. He was far too professional to air his grievances on national television. Instead, he dealt with these evil guests in his own quiet, subtle ways. A carefully worded joke here, a subtly shortened interview there, a strategically placed commercial break to cut them off. Johnny had a whole arsenal of tools at his disposal to maintain control and protect the integrity of his show. But the emotional toll of dealing with these difficult personalities was undeniable. Imagine having to plaster on a smile and engage in witty banter with someone you genuinely despised. Someone who had just moments before been berating a young production assistant or making offensive comments about another guest. It takes a certain kind of strength to compartmentalize like that, to separate the personal from the professional, to keep the show running smoothly despite the internal turmoil. And that's what we're going to explore in this video. We're going to delve into the stories of 9 guests who, for various reasons, earned a place on Johnny Carson's evil list. We're going to uncover the shocking behavior that made him cringe, the behind-the-scenes drama that never made it to air, and the subtle ways in which Johnny exacted his revenge. These aren't tales of grand villainy, mind you. They're tales of arrogance, entitlement, and a profound lack of empathy. They're tales of individuals who, despite their fame and fortune, failed to live up to the basic standards of human decency. And they're tales of a man, Johnny Carson, who was determined to uphold those standards, even in the face of immense pressure and professional risk. So get ready to have your perceptions challenged. Get ready to see the king of late night in a whole new light. Get ready to discover the hidden darkness lurking beneath the glitz and glamour of the golden age of television. Because what we're about to uncover is a story of not just entertainment, but of ethics, values, and the unseen battles fought by the man who brought laughter into our homes every night. The battle to keep his stage and his soul just a little bit cleaner. Music becomes slightly more intense, transitioning to the next section. All right. Let's dive into the juicy stuff, the nitty-gritty, the behind-the-scenes tales that peeled back the glossy veneer of Hollywood's golden age. We're talking about 9 individuals who, for Johnny Carson, were more than just difficult guests. They represented a fundamental clash of values, a disruption of the carefully cultivated atmosphere of respect and good humor that defined The Tonight Show. First up, we have George C. Scott. Now a towering figure in acting, a man who could deliver Shakespeare with the force of a hurricane, but off-screen, witnesses paint a picture of a man wrestling some intense inner demons, often fueled by copious amounts of alcohol. On camera, he could be engaging, even charming, but there were reports of him showing up to tapings visibly inebriated, slurring his words and getting argumentative. One particularly awkward appearance saw him launch into a tirade about the state of modern theater, completely derailing the interview and leaving Carson visibly flustered. But the real issue, according to several staff members, was Scott's behavior toward the crew. He was reportedly dismissive, even abusive, to those he deemed beneath him, berating stagehands and making unreasonable demands. Carson, who valued the professionalism and hard work of his crew above almost everything, found this behavior deeply offensive. There's a story that after one particularly volatile taping, Carson told his producer, "That man can win all the Oscars he wants, but he'll never win my respect." Scott's appearances dwindled sharply after that. Next, let's discuss Shelley Winters. The New York actress, with her brassy personality and Oscar-winning talent, was a formidable presence. But there was also a fragility beneath the surface that sometimes manifested in diva-like demands and emotional outbursts. What reportedly grated on Carson was her chronic tardiness. She was notorious for arriving late to rehearsals and tapings, holding up production and throwing the entire schedule into disarray. One former stage manager recalled Winters showing up over 2 hours late for a taping, blaming it on everything from traffic to a broken heel, without so much as an apology. Then there was what some would describe as narcissism. Other guests often felt sidelined in her presence. Another guest one evening was Eddie Gourmet, and rather than support and laugh along with the performer, witnesses recalled her making faces and whispering to those around her that Gourmet couldn't sing a note. Carson, who had a natural respect for others' talents, found Winters' behavior to be boorish and mean-spirited. Then there was Truman Capote, a literary genius, a master of prose and a social butterfly who could charm the pants off anyone. But Capote also had a dark side, fueled by insecurity and a penchant for gossip. On The Tonight Show, he could be brilliantly witty and entertaining, regaling audiences with scandalous anecdotes about the rich and famous. But his appearances were always a gamble. He had a well-known drinking problem, and when intoxicated, his wit could turn vicious, his gossip malicious. There are several accounts of Capote making thinly veiled, often cruel, remarks about other celebrities during his appearances, leaving Carson in the unenviable position of trying to steer the conversation away from potentially libelous territory. It wasn't necessarily what Capote did on stage. According to producers, in the days leading up to his appearance, Capote would call the show with lists of demands. It was rumored he wanted Barbara Walters banned from the studio so he could ensure he was the focus of attention. Carson, who wanted the show to be entertaining to viewers, not the cause of real-world dramas, privately hated his appearance. Now, let's talk about Sammy Davis Jr., an undeniable talent. A triple threat who could sing, dance, and act with unparalleled charisma. But beneath the dazzling smile and effortless charm, there was a complex and often troubled individual. Sammy was a frequent guest on Carson's show, and while he was generally well-behaved on camera, there were whispers of a deep-seated insecurity and a constant need for validation. According to several sources, Sammy insisted on being introduced with an excessive list of accomplishments. He also allegedly complained about the other guests, especially if they were gaining more attention than he was. One crew member recalled Sammy sulking in his dressing room after one show, convinced that Carson favored another guest over him. Carson, who always aimed to give his guests a fair chance to shine, found Sammy's insecurity exhausting. Moving on, we have Zsa Gabor, a name synonymous with glamour, extravagance, and a certain, shall we say, directness. Zsa was a master of self-promotion, and she understood the power of celebrity better than almost anyone. But her appearances on The Tonight Show were often marked by a level of self-absorption that tested Carson's patience. She was notorious for interrupting other guests, turning the conversation back to herself, and name-dropping with a relentless enthusiasm that bordered on the absurd. A producer once recalled her asking if she was going to sit closer to Johnny than Farrah Fawcett, as she was the bigger star. And then there were her infamous malapropisms, which, while sometimes amusing, often came across as a deliberate attempt to appear charmingly ditzy. Carson, a wordsmith himself, found her deliberate mangling of the English language grating. Next, let's talk about Orson Welles, a filmmaking genius, a visionary artist, and a man of immense intellect. But Welles also had a reputation for being difficult, demanding, and utterly convinced of his own superiority. While his appearances on the show were rare, they were always memorable, and not always in a good way. Welles had what some would describe as eccentric eating habits. Before a taping, a staffer asked him what kind of food he wanted in the green room. He insisted he wanted an entire roasted pig and 12 bottles of champagne for himself. But beyond that, the biggest issue was his tendency to dominate the conversation. He would hold court for hours, expounding on his theories about art, politics, and the human condition, rarely giving anyone else a chance to speak. Carson, who valued brevity and wit, found Welles's monologues tedious. Then there was Liberace, a showman extraordinaire, a master of glitz and glamour, and a performer who knew how to connect with his audience. But Liberace also had a carefully cultivated public persona, one that concealed a complex and often contradictory private life. His appearances on The Tonight Show were always meticulously staged, every gesture, every smile, every sequin perfectly in place. While Carson never explicitly condemned Liberace's flamboyant style, there was a subtle undercurrent of discomfort in their interactions. Some staff members recalled Carson making veiled jokes about Liberace's sexuality, remarks that, while mild by today's standards, hinted at a deeper unease. The problem was that the jokes weren't actually funny or clever. Instead, they were a reflection of Carson's own discomfort with Liberace's obvious difference. Let's move on to Dinah Shore. Though widely considered to be the kindest person in Hollywood, Dinah Shore could be a real nightmare on the Carson show. She arrived with an entourage that rivaled a royal parade and would demand a completely new set of wardrobe for each appearance. There were rumors of her refusing to continue with the show due to the fact that the stage crew did not include her favorite brand of sparkling water on hand, according to a longtime assistant. Shore was only happy when she was making others unhappy. One time, before going on stage, it was said Shore overheard a few of the wardrobe assistants gossiping and proceeded to demand they get fired on the spot. There were reports of Johnny intervening, but she refused to budge. And finally, we come to Red Fox. By the time Red Fox came on the show, Johnny Carson had already heard stories about him being crazy. The comedian's appearances were always an adventure. What unnerved Johnny the most was that you never knew what Red was going to say or do. He was unscripted, and, if you were to believe the rumors, high. According to the stage crew, it was no surprise to see Red Fox get into disagreements with the rest of the guests, stage crew, producers, writers, and just about anyone else that dared to get close to the man. Carson admired Fox's comedy, but not his behavior. So what happened to these evil guests after their less than stellar appearances on The Tonight Show? Well, the consequences ranged from subtle snubs to outright banishment, all orchestrated with Carson's characteristic blend of Midwestern charm and steely resolve. You see, Johnny wasn't one for shouting matches or public spats. His power lay in his control of the Tonight Show platform, and he wielded that power with precision. For some, the repercussions were barely noticeable to the viewing public. Perhaps they found their appearances becoming less frequent, their segments shorter, or their placement in the lineup less desirable. Remember Bette Davis? A single disastrous appearance in the early 80s led to a quiet but firm decision: never again. Rooney's visits grew less frequent, and when he was booked, producers often scheduled him for daytime pre-tapings rather than live evening broadcasts. It was Johnny's quiet way of drawing a line, still honoring Rooney's status as a Hollywood icon, but refusing to let chaos and misconduct ruin the integrity of his show. These weren't publicized blacklists, mind you, more like a gentle fade into obscurity within the Tonight Show universe. Booking decisions, as any seasoned television producer will tell you, are a complex dance of ratings, availability, and, of course, the host's preference. And a quiet word from Johnny, a subtle suggestion to maybe give so-and-so a rest for a while, was all it took. It was a whisper that carried the weight of a broadcasting empire. Then there were those who faced a more definitive exile. Jerry Lewis, for instance, was effectively blacklisted after repeated displays of arrogance and disrespect. This was a rare and decisive move for Carson, who generally tolerated difficult personalities for the sake of ratings. But Lewis crossed a line and the consequences were absolute. No more Tonight Show appearances, ever. Think about that for a moment. To be banished from The Tonight Show during its golden age was a career blow of significant proportions. It wasn't just about missing a late-night interview. It was about losing access to a cultural touchstone, a platform that could make or break careers. But even in these cases, Carson rarely, if ever, publicly aired his grievances. He maintained a veneer of professionalism, even towards those he privately considered to be, well, evil. This was partly due to his inherent aversion to conflict, but it was also a strategic calculation. He understood that engaging in public feuds would only diminish the stature of his show. The Tonight Show was supposed to be an oasis of wit and entertainment, not a battleground for celebrity egos. And this brings us to a crucial point: Carson's values. He was at his core a professional. He believed in treating everyone with respect, from the camera operators to the A-list celebrities. He demanded punctuality, courtesy, and a willingness to play along with the spirit of the show. Those who violated these principles, whether through arrogance, rudeness, or sheer obnoxiousness, found themselves on Johnny's, well, let's call it the no-fly list. These experiences, these encounters with difficult and disrespectful guests, undeniably shaped Carson's legacy and defined the character of The Tonight Show. They reinforced his commitment to professionalism, his unwavering respect for his staff, and his dedication to creating a positive and enjoyable experience for his audience. He wasn't just a comedian. He was a conductor, orchestrating a nightly symphony of laughter and entertainment. And like any good conductor, he had to maintain order and harmony within his orchestra. Looking back, it's tempting to judge Carson's actions through a modern lens. Was he too quick to blacklist? Was he too sensitive to perceived slights? Perhaps. But it's important to remember the context of the time. The entertainment industry in the golden age was a very different beast. Power dynamics were more entrenched, expectations were different, and the lines between personal and professional were often blurred. Ultimately, Johnny Carson's handling of these evil guests reveals a complex and fascinating aspect of his personality. He was a master of charm and wit, but he was also a man of principle. He valued respect, professionalism, and a positive working environment. And he was willing to use his power to protect those values, even if it meant banishing a few stars from his kingdom. The end result was a show that not only entertained millions, but also reflected the host's own unwavering commitment to decency and respect. His ability to create a family-like environment for his crew ensured longevity and a higher standard. And so we come to the end of our list. 9 guests who, in Johnny Carson's eyes, crossed the line and earned the dubious distinction of being evil. But as we reflect on these stories, one question remains. Who else should be on this list? Which other guests, during the long and storied history of The Tonight Show, tested Johnny Carson's patience and challenged his values? Share your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. We're eager to hear your insights and uncover even more tales from the behind-the-scenes world of late-night television.